here to tell you a story, a couple stories, but mostly one story. First, I need to introduce myself. More than anything else, I'm a maker, and you might have heard a little bit about makers before. They're people whose passion is to build things. And that passion for me has manifested itself several times in turning waste products into energy. Taking something that is ostensibly, according to our society, something we don't need or want anymore, and turning that into something that is highly coveted and desired. And I'm going to tell you this story in 3 parts. The first part is going to be about how people came together in an artist space and started a company. The second part is about an old technology came together with existing technologies to create something new and powerful. And the third part is how it's actually manifesting itself in the world around us right now. But before I begin, I'm going to be a terrible storyteller, and I'm going to ruin the surprise and tell you exactly what All Power Labs does currently. So this is the problem statement. 4 billion people in the world don't have reliable access to energy. Some of the places that we work with have even less than that. Now, when you think of energy right now, think of power. Some of you are looking down at your cell phones. Some of you might have your laptops. You probably charged those last night or this morning. You might be calling your friends, telling them how much you love them, telling them how much they've impacted your life. You might be checking stock prices, might be getting information. All of those change the way you live. All of those help you achieve the things you want to achieve. But most people in the world can't do that regularly. Or if they are, they're just starting to get a glimpse of that, and we're starting to see how the world is affected when you give people access to power. It also affects your health. If you have access to refrigeration, you have access to nutrition, your placenta is going to be healthier, and your baby's going to be healthier, and they're going to have healthier kids. So it connects, it matters. When you have refrigeration, you have medications, vaccines that you can't get otherwise. So providing power in places where you can't provide power otherwise makes an immediate difference in people's lives, but we can't do it in the same ways we have done it because those resources are either destroying our planet or growing scarce. So we're looking for alternatives. The alternative that we have is one that integrates systems of the people who need electricity most in the world with other technology to give them that additional thing they need, which is power. So when people harvest food, there's byproducts, and those byproducts sometimes are left to rot, sometimes they go into compost, but they can also be put into a machine that turns them into electricity. These are the nut shells. These are the coconut shells. These are the palm nut kernel shells. These are wood chips. These are corn cobs. These are things that people don't have a good use for, but when they start scaling up a farm, or they even have a small farm, they have a lot of. Or if you bring a village together, they have a lot of. And when you turn that into electricity that creates green renewable energy and can provide power for that same village, that same town, or that shop, or whatever it is, then you create a closed loop system where you're producing something that has a waste product, and that waste product then gets to be used and turned into electricity and has value again, and that value is turned into things like processing that food so it has a higher value to markets, and that brings people all up to a higher level. So the way we do that at All Power Labs is through this machine. We call it the Power Palette. It's a gasifier, if you know what that is. If you don't, I'm going to talk about it in the second part of the story, so don't worry about it. And it's small, and it produces about 15 to 20 kilowatts of electricity, and it does it at a very affordable price, less than diesel to operate and cheaper than solar to install. And it's on demand, so whenever you want it. Well, this is what I mean by mobile. This is in Kenya, and it's being delivered to some students who are going to be working with it, and it's on a converted motorcycle, as you see. So 20 kilowatts of power. In the US, that's only 3 households, but elsewhere in the world, that can be as much as a 100 or 200 people village. It can be a hospital. It can be a machine shop. It's a lot of power. Before I go into that, I want to talk about how important getting the right group of people, a different group of people together to solve challenging problems. And you might have heard in Kim's talk, he talked about artist space and hacker spaces, bringing tools and people together to create solutions. This is a story, not just my own, it's a story of all makers. Of one of those spaces in particular, it's called the Shipyard. And at the Shipyard, they make a lot of Burning Man projects. It was an art space. People came together. They built art cars. It had fire, and it had things that whirled around, and they're in the desert having a great time, and they're actually solving interesting problems. This right here is Mechabolic. It was a 40-foot sand creature that ate trash and turned it into motion. If you've ever seen Red Dune, you might be thinking of sandworms right now. Or maybe you're thinking about Back to the Future, when he puts a banana peel and some beer down this machine, and he gets gigawatts of electricity. And that's much what they were looking at when they were trying just to build a simple idea. And that idea was, wouldn't it be cool if we could build a machine that took trash and turned it into motion? And what a cool art idea that would be. And they built it at this space called the Shipyard, which is a bunch of containers. The idea was, in the middle of Berkeley, let's put all these containers together and build this structure, and artists will rent out the structure and have a shared shop. And that shared shop could be used by everyone, and it would bring people together, and those people being brought together, they would share their ideas and help each other on their projects, and it would be incredible. And Berkeley didn't like that. They didn't like that there were cars with spinning blades on it and fire shooting out of it, and they had kind of taken over all of the vacant lots around them, and they got mad, and they shut off the electricity. Okay. Well, artists who mostly go to Burning Man and are trying to create something new don't like having their electricity turned off and telling them that they're not allowed to do what they're going to do. So they went to sustainable energy. They went off-grid. They put solar panels up. They had a biodiesel generator. And during that time when they were being strapped for electricity, they thought back to Metabolic, this 40-foot machine that they built using a gasifier, and thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could take trash here and turn that into power so we could power our art projects and the things we want to do here? They started looking at exactly that. Now, this was written on the whiteboard before one of my colleagues left for Liberia. He left, and the next day this was written on the board. Apparently, he didn't bring cash or a plan. But that was much how All Power Labs started out in the early days. We didn't really have cash or a plan, and it was an interesting time, and it was full of beautiful ideas about how this open source project, this originally started as the plans were available to everyone. Anyone could build the gasifier who wanted to build a gasifier, and it would sweep the world and change everybody's lives, and we'd all be using biomass again to power. Well, it was a little grandiose, but they started building these and selling them and giving the plans away, and these started turning up everywhere. All over the world, people were building these, not in huge numbers and not tons of people, but there was interest. But the way they used this every time was they hooked it up to a generator and they made electricity with it. It's like, okay, maybe we don't want to build just a little device that's open source and cool, but only creates gas that you have to do something else with to get electricity out of it. If everyone wants this, let's build exactly what they want. So we became a real business and sort of cleaned up the place a little bit. We're still working in shipping containers and have a shared shop, but we took that basic idea and combined it into a device that that was the full process from start to finish, gasification to electricity. So I'm going to talk about gasification a little bit. This will get a little bit technical. I know you all love it, and you'll learn something new, and it will be really great. You can tell all your friends and sound cool at parties. Gasification is actually a really old technology. It was used in the World Wars as a way to power cars. When gas wasn't allowed to be used in the vehicles anymore, farmers would actually put this on their tractors and power their tractors this way. So it's an old technology, but it hasn't really resurfaced since then in any meaningful way. So when trying to come up with the idea of the power palette, these were the ideas that we wanted to have. We wanted to have off-the-shelf components. We didn't need to invent everything new. We didn't want to have specialty custom parts for everything because we wanted everyone to afford this. We wanted it to be available to anyone who wanted to make renewable energy. So standard industrial parts, we had off-the-shelf engine, we had standard generator, and then we added our little gasifier to this, combined it all up, and had something that people could build and fix all over the world, and that was this power pallet. So here's one of the very first ones that was shipped from All Power Labs. It's on an old pallet, bolted down, same gasifier, same device. We were still in the mindset that what people wanted was to play with gasification, because that's what the experimenters kit, the first gasifier we built, was about. It's like, oh, people are going to take this on and figure it out. Well, it turns out most people didn't want to play and experiment with gasification. They wanted to have electricity. So this is what we do. We take wood chips or nutshells in, we put electricity and heat out for use, and the byproduct is primarily biochar. It's charcoal. It's something that's safe in the environment. It's fixed carbon. It's not biologically available. You can put it in the ground. It's safe. The other output from the engine is the same as your car. Not great, but not as bad as many of the other power sources out there. And it's coming from biological means and fixing most of the carbon. So, sustainable technology. This is what pyrolysis and gasification actually is. When you look at the heart of the machine, the part that makes the gas, that makes everything work. Your match does it. Any fireplace does it. It is the breaking apart of fire into its constituent components and separation of those into the right place to make it more useful to us. You have the drying process. It gets hot. It releases its moisture. Then the oils and the volatiles start to come out. And then you have a little bit of the hydrocarbons and soots, and those set on fire, and that is the combustion part where it's reacting with oxygen, releasing heat. And then you also have those same hot coals. They're also reducing some of those gases at the same time, and they're becoming carbon monoxide and hydrogen again, and all of that's mixed together, and you see smoke and fire. And it turns out that you can break those each down and separate them in such a way that what you get out, the gas out, is primarily carbon monoxide, which we generally think of as bad, so you don't want to breathe that, and hydrogen, which are both energy-dense gases that you can put into a standard engine. We're not inventing a new engine. This is a natural gas engine, so it's calibrated a little differently, but it is a spark plug, similar to what you put in your car kind of engine. And that then combusts that CO2 and hydrogen to produce power. Now what's happening in the gasifier, you dry it, you drive off with the water and the pyrolysis gases mix together. Some of it, not all of it, is burned in the center, in the hearth, and that creates enough heat that it heats the charcoal that comes down, and that charcoal reduces, it breaks the water that we had before, and the pyrolysis gas, which is a mixture of all sorts of hydrocarbons. It's tarry stuff. It's like when you have a cigarette, the stuff that you're putting in your lungs that we think of as really bad and sticky. It's bad and sticky in our work too, and it gets on everything. Just don't want to breathe it. That stuff gets broken down for the most part and turned into, in that reduction, reduced back down to hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So in our system, we wanted to accentuate that. We wanted to extend it so that everything was a little more efficient. So it comes into this through the hopper, and the hopper is where you put your walnut shells or your palm nut kernel shells. Palm nut kernel, by the way, you've all used vegetable oil at some point in your life, and you might have said palm oil on the side. Well, that actually comes from this hard nut. It's grown very commonly in West Africa. And that hard nut, that outer shell, has a lot of oil in it, but it's mostly not used. It's a byproduct of this process. And the inner parts get crushed, and that oil comes out. It's red, and then they refine it, and it becomes that nice yellow you're used to. And that's sold all over the world. In West Africa, they use it for forging things and or it's just left, and it's free. Anyway, you can run all that into the hopper. First, we take waste energy from the gasification step to dry it. So first, reuse of waste heat. Then we put it into the pyrolysis zone, which actually takes the waste and heat from the engine to drive pyrolysis. Now, traditionally, it's driven from the heat in the hearth, but by using the waste energy from the engine, we actually save more of that heat to heat up the charcoals for reduction, have a better reduction. So we're stretching that process out by using waste heat over and over again, trying to make it more efficient. And then we add about 1/4 of the air necessary to burn the fuel. So not enough to completely burn it, but that stifled burning there creates the remainder of the heat that drives this gasification process. Now after this, it's actually kind of sooty, like most processes, burning processes that produce electricity. So we run it through a cyclone, we get those particles out, we run that gas back up to the drying bucket where, as I said before, it heats up the biomass, comes back, and then you filter it, and then you run it into the engine. So this is a breakdown of what the system looks like and where each of those steps is happening. Standard generator, like you might see in your emergency backup generator with an engine. Grid tie box if you want to push power back onto the grid. It's a biomass filter, so it's actually using wood chips, and all the gas particles are colliding into it, and those wood chips get saturated with the extra tars, and then you can throw those back into the hopper so that you don't end up with tar piles. And then on the backside, here's the gasifier itself. Very hot, don't touch it. The process runs at about 10 to 1200 C, depending on what you're running through it. On the outsides, it's still quite warm. Ash collection vessels, you can run it for a longer time, cyclone, and filter again. So the first part of my claim was I'm excited about taking existing systems to solve complicated problems. The complicated problem in this case was how do you make electricity with stuff that people have available all over the world, and that biomass. And this was one answer. We use standard off-the-shelf components. We put them all together in a machine. This is something that can be built or serviced in most places in the world, and that provides electricity. But just providing electricity isn't actually enough to make this work. it takes people who know how to use it. There's no driver's license equivalent for the power pallet. You don't walk up to it and go, oh, I know how to run this thermochemical process that's actually a power plant refinery and this power plant and can make electricity, voila, fixes everything. You actually need to have someone who's been trained a little bit on how to use this and how to run the machine. So it takes that knowledge and that training. It takes financing. Turns out that most people who need power most don't have, even though it has a lower CapEx, it doesn't have an infinitely low one. Most people need some financing to make the project work. And it needs integration into a community to know what's a good fuel source, how you get that, how you set up the power distribution. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite sites, which is run by the Biomass Brothers in Liberia. And they have been our partners for over a year, powering Brooker Washington Institute, which is a university outside of Kakata. This is the site, and this is what they're trying to do. So the Biomass Brothers were a group of former students from Brooker Washington Institute and partnered with Eco Liberia, which is a non-for-profit in the area. They've come together to buy and service a number of these power pallets, enough to power the campus, which was previously powered intermittently by diesel generators. Now, diesel, besides being a little bit dirty and loud, is incredibly expensive in Liberia. You could be paying it, upwards of $10 a gallon. We're not talking about something that is easily available. And when the freighter doesn't come to drop off diesel in Liberia, they don't have any. So it's an intermittent supply chain. They have a site there now. Here's several of the power pallets being run on site, which takes chips from the rubber trees. A rubber tree has a certain life in which you can tap it, and most of Liberia is planted with rubber trees and palm for palm nut oil. And those rubber trees, when they're dead, they get chipped up, and nothing's really done with those chips. So we're using rubber tree chips, and they replant the trees. So this is not an extractive process. We use these chips and sometimes a mixture of palm nut kernels as the fuel source. And when I say we, I mean the Biomass Brothers. So I mean Willie when I say this. He's here showing off the product. And they chip and process whatever the wood is they need to get it to the right size, and then they put in the machines. He's brilliant. He makes this whole project come together, but he's a student from the school. And by having a student from the school who was taught how to use this machine and then teaching others how to use this machine and bringing graduates from the school into this venture, we're creating a larger system. It's not us alone trying to provide power, but giving people the tools and them creating the entrepreneurial space and mentality necessary to make electricity systemic and make a sustainable system that takes a product that is commonly available, bio-waste, and turn that into electricity where it's most needed. So they're starting here, and they're providing power now to the university and soon to the village around the university. And they want to stem and grow from there with the help of the city. This is them working on the machine. When this machine breaks, by the way, or we say, okay, we're going to switch to a ceramic hearth or something, he goes out and he finds perlite and clay from the river and cement from the local industry and mixes it all together and makes his own ceramic, cuts off the bell, puts the ceramic in, welds it back together. He knows this machine probably better than I, and I've been on designing the V5 reactor for a year and a half. Now, I said Berkeley turned off electricity over 5 years ago. They've turned it back on since, but recently they went so far as to come full circle, and this project that came out of a Burning Man project that was so despised, and this group of artists which were coming together to make these things, not following the rules. But now we are part of the Clean Energy Corridor in Berkeley. It's a pride and joy of Berkeley. Innovation and entrepreneurship, and the vice mayor came by to our 5th year anniversary to thank us for our good work. So people come around, I guess. Other people come around to charge their cars. Not my car. This is our team, and every single one of them has put their heart and blood and sweat into making this technology possible and just trying to provide something wonderful in the world and doing it through bringing creative people together. And those people sometimes are in Liberia or the Philippines or in Italy, or sometimes they're in Berkeley, and they're brought together just for a love of making things. So I am a maker. I like turning waste products into electricity, and I hope that you will be inspired to whatever it is you want to build or see happen in the world, bring together the right group of people and see it happen. Thank you for listening.